It was supposed to be just a weekend hike, a quiet way to clear my head after a long winter stuck in town. I'd been going up near Boone since I was a kid, and I thought I knew every ridge and creek bed like the back of my hand. But that morning, the trail I picked was one I didn't recognize. It split off from the main loop, a narrow game path I must have overlooked 100 times before. There wasn't even a trail marker, just a small opening between the trees, a little too even, a little too clean. I figured it'd be a good shortcut down toward the old fire road. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it got after I stepped in. No birds, no crunch of leaves, just a kind of thick stillness, like the woods were holding their breath. I thought maybe a storm was rolling in. The air smelled heavy, like wet bark and iron. Every few feet I found old cuts in the trees, like someone had been marking a path a long time ago. The bark had grown over most of them, but you could still see faint notches, wide and shallow, like an axe that never swung quite straight. I hiked maybe 20 minutes before I saw the first light. It was faint, orange, wavering, way off in the trees. My first thought was a campfire, maybe hunters or kids camping off-season. It was private land, but nobody really cared out here. I almost turned back, but curiosity got the better of me. I figured I'd just walk close enough to make sure I wasn't wandering into somebody's campsite. The light dipped behind a ridge, and when I followed it, the trail vanished. The ground turned soft and mossy, and every step sank with a dull thud. Then I saw another light, then two, then three. Small lanterns, each glowing the same dull orange, hanging just above the ground. They were spaced evenly apart, circling something in the clearing below me. At first, I thought they were on stakes, but as I got closer, I realized each one was being held. I ducked behind a fallen stump and froze. There must have been 8 or 9 figures, all wearing the same thing, long dark coats with hoods that covered their faces. They weren't talking. They weren't even moving much. They just stood around that clearing, swaying gently, lanterns moving in a perfect rhythm. And in the center of the circle stood something that didn't make sense. It looked like a figure, tall, made of wood, branches, and vines all woven together like a man. I could see where something had been carved into its chest, symbols I didn't recognize, rough and sharp. Its head was wrapped in dried moss. No one spoke, but there was a sound. A low, heavy breathing, all of them, together. Not fast or panicked, but steady, in rhythm, like a slow tide. I remember the sound hitting me in the chest, like I could feel it vibrating through the ground. The air around me felt thick, heavy enough that I had to fight the urge to cough. I don't know how long I crouched there. Could have been minutes, could have been half an hour. I remember thinking how wrong it felt. It wasn't like church or any kind of ritual I'd ever seen. It felt too quiet, too private, like I was seeing something I was never supposed to. I shifted my foot, and the wet ground gave way under a branch. The crack echoed through the trees. They all stopped breathing at once. Every single lantern froze mid-sway. I didn't even breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they could hear it. Then one of them, the one closest to the effigy, turned. Slowly. The lantern rose, and I saw just enough of their face beneath the hood to know they weren't wearing a mask. Their eyes caught the lantern light. They weren't angry or surprised. They were calm, focused, looking right at me. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I just took off through the trees, branches tearing at my sleeves. The forest looked different. The trail I'd come down wasn't there anymore, and every direction felt wrong. Behind me, I heard movement. Not running, just the faint jingle of something metal. A lantern chain. Every time I thought I'd lost them, I'd see that dull orange light flicker between the trees, steady, unhurried. I don't know how long I ran. The woods seemed endless. When I finally stumbled onto the fire road, my lungs were raw, and I could still hear that low, synchronized breathing somewhere behind me. I sprinted until I saw the glint of my car's hood through the brush. I fumbled. With the keys, hands shaking so bad I dropped them twice before the lock caught. I slammed the door and hit the headlights, and that's when I saw it. At the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards away, A single lantern swayed side to side. No movement, no figure, just the lantern, swinging gently, like it was being held by the air itself. I don't remember driving home. I must have made it in record time, but I couldn't recall a single turn. My hands were still trembling when I parked, and I didn't sleep that night. I just kept seeing that light, that soft orange glow, swaying behind my eyelids every time I blinked. I told myself it was just some weird local gathering, maybe a rural church doing something old-fashioned, something harmless. But the next day, I went back. Not all the way, just far enough to see if I'd imagined it. The entrance to that game trail was gone. I mean, completely gone. Where there had been a clear opening between the trees, now there was just solid brush, thick with briars and undergrowth, like it hadn't been walked in years. I walked the main trail for an hour, trying to find any trace of that ridge, that clearing, anything. Nothing. It was like the woods had healed overnight. I was about to give up when I saw something hanging from a low branch near the parking lot, a small lantern made of tin and glass, the same kind I'd seen the night before. Inside, the wick was burned out, the metal still faintly warm. I left it there and never went back to Boone after dark again. But here's the part that still keeps me up sometimes. A few weeks later, I was cleaning out my truck, and I found something stuck in the grill. A small vine, twisted tight around itself, shaped like a man with its head bowed. I threw it away. But some nights, when the air is still, and the woods behind my house go quiet, I swear I can see that same orange flicker between the trees. Just far enough away that I can't tell if it's a reflection, or if someone finally found me. It was the fall of '98 when the county asked for volunteers to help search for a missing boy out near Blowing Rock. His name was Tyler Bishop, 12 years old, last seen chasing his dog near the tree line behind his family's property. The search had already gone on for 3 days by the time I joined in. Folks were saying the woods were eating the sound of our voices, that the dogs couldn't pick up a trail past a certain ridge. I didn't believe in that kind of talk, but even then the air out there felt wrong. Still, you don't ignore a family in need, not around here. So I showed up with a thermos of coffee, my old pack, and a pair of boots that had seen more mud than leather. They grouped us in pairs, me and a young kid named Travis, maybe 21, new to the area. It was cold that morning, the kind of damp chill that seeps through layers. The ground was still slick from last night's rain, and mist hung low enough to hide your knees. We were assigned to the north sector, near the old Blue Ridge Ridgeway, where the woods slope down into a valley that floods easy when the weather turns. The sheriff told us to keep an eye out for the dog, a brown mutt, half lab, half shepherd, because sometimes finding the dog led to the kid. We set off slow, marking trees with orange tape as we went. The forest back there isn't friendly terrain. It's thick, tangled, and it feels old in a way that has nothing to do with time. The kind of old that doesn't like to be walked through. The further we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no crickets, just the squish of mud under our boots. After about an hour, Travis spotted something near a fallen pine, a small blue backpack. It was soaked through, half buried in mud, but it still had a patch stitched on the front. T. Bishop. I called it in over the radio, but all we got was static. The others were supposed to be within a mile, but we couldn't raise anyone. The line just hissed like it was breathing. We figured we'd take a look around before heading back up the ridge. That's when I saw it. A narrow trail cutting off the main path, half hidden by underbrush. It was too straight to be animal, but too narrow for any hiker, and it wasn't on the map. Probably just a deer path, Travis said, but his voice cracked a little when he said it. I didn't answer. The ground there was soft, still wet from the rain, but there weren't any footprints. Not from the boy, not from animals, not even ours once we stepped on it. The mud didn't take impressions, like it was swallowing the marks before they could form. We followed it anyway. I don't know why. Maybe we thought it would lead to a den or a cave, someplace a scared kid might have hidden. The path wound deeper and deeper downhill, through trees that started to look wrong. Trunks too close together, branches bending in the same direction, almost like they were reaching toward something unseen. The air felt heavier there, the kind of still that presses against your eardrums. I kept thinking I heard movement behind us, but when I turned, the path just sat there, empty. Half a mile in, we started noticing carvings. Small ones at first, spirals, then eyes, scratched into bark with something sharp. The further we went, the more there were. Dozens of them. Every few feet, a new one, getting more detailed, deeper into the wood. One tree had what looked like an open mouth carved into it, lined with small stones. I ran my hand over it. The wood was warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight, but we were standing in the shade. I told Travis not to touch anything. He didn't answer me at first. He was staring down the trail, pale as the fog. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I listened. At first, nothing, then a low sound, distant, like wind moving through a hollow. Except there wasn't any wind. It was layered, almost like voices. Not words, just tone, low and steady, humming together in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. I tried the radio again. Still static. The hum grew louder for a few seconds, then stopped, cut clean off. That silence afterward was worse than the sound itself. We decided to turn back. I told Travis to start marking trees again so we could find our way, but when I looked at the ones we'd already marked, the tape was gone. Not torn or hanging, gone. The branches were bare. Every direction looked the same, and the trees all leaned inward slightly, like they were bending over us. I could feel something in my gut telling me we weren't supposed to be there. We kept walking anyway, though every step felt heavier. The trail started to narrow, the trees closing in. I kept checking behind us, half expecting to see someone. Once I thought I did, a flicker of movement between the trunks, something pale. But it vanished as soon as I focused on it. Travis was muttering to himself, a small prayer on repeat. He said his grandma used to talk about hollow watchers, spirits that guard the old trails. I told him to save the stories for when we were out, but my voice sounded wrong. Small, uncertain. We finally hit a patch of ground that looked familiar, a slope leading up to a ridge. But when we reached it, the path behind us wasn't there anymore. The trees had shifted, I swear they had. The carvings were gone too, just smooth bark, unbroken. I felt dizzy, disoriented, like the forest had turned itself inside out around us. It took hours before we saw anything that looked like home. By the time we stumbled back onto the main trail, the sun was already setting. My radio came to life all at once, overlapping voices, shouts, static, like it had been building up and suddenly burst free. We called off the rest of the search for the night, told the others what happened, but no one wanted to go near that ridge again. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the carvings, the spirals, the eyes, the mouths, what they meant. I went back the next morning, just to the edge of the main trail. I didn't step past the first marker, but I looked down the slope, trying to see if I could spot where the deer path began. It wasn't there, just trees, but they looked wrong, darker. The trunks were wet, like sap or something thicker had been dripping down them. The forest didn't move, but I could feel it watching, like every branch had turned toward me. They never found the boy. His dog turned up weeks later near the highway, thin and shaking, with a small spiral carved into its collar. No one could explain it. The sheriff said maybe it was vandals or some sick joke by locals, but I knew better. Sometimes when it rains and the woods go quiet, I still hear that hum, soft, distant, carried on air that doesn't move. And if you stand still long enough, you start to feel like it's calling for someone. Not you exactly, but something in you that remembers the sound. I don't go hiking anymore. Haven't since that day. But sometimes late at night, when the fog rolls in thick from the ridge, I catch myself looking out the window toward the tree line, half expecting to see that narrow path open up again. The one with no footprints. I used to take the same road home every night from the mill, a narrow, two-lane strip of asphalt that wound through the holler, past the old church, and over a wooden bridge that crossed Stony Creek. Most folks avoided it after dark, especially when the fog rolled in, but it shaved 10 minutes off the drive, and after 12-hour shifts, that meant more than superstition. The bridge was old, built sometime in the 30s, and every time my tires hit those boards, it sounded like a breath being pulled through teeth, long, strained, complaining. Still, I'd driven it 100 times and never thought twice about it, until that one night in late November. It had rained most of the afternoon, the kind that turns the air heavy and thick with the smell of pine and diesel. By the time I clocked out, the sky was a dull gray smear, fog hanging low like smoke from a dying fire. The world felt smaller in that kind of weather. Sound didn't travel right. Even the hum of my old Chevy sounded muffled as I wound down the road. I remember the dashboard clock flickering between 11:56 and 11:57, the kind of glitch I'd ignored before. Right as I reached the first turn toward the bridge, there was something about that fog that night. It didn't drift like normal. It just sat there waiting. The closer I got, the more the world disappeared. My high beams barely reached the guardrail. I slowed down to a crawl, my tires slick on the wet road, until I felt the first clunk of wood under the wheels. The sound echoed up through the floorboards. It always did, but that night it sounded hollow, empty in a way that made my stomach twist. I was halfway across when the engine sputtered. Once, twice, and then died completely. The lights went out, leaving nothing but darkness and the sound of rain tapping against the roof. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. I could still hear the faint click of the fuel pump trying to turn over, but it was like the truck didn't want to wake up. I sat there for a moment, staring at the fog pressing in against the windshield, thinking maybe I'd flooded it. Then, through the sound of the creek below, I heard something else. A murmur. At first I thought it was the wind under the bridge, but the rhythm was too steady. It had a cadence to it, low and layered, like a dozen voices whispering the same sentence again and again. I cracked the door open and stepped out, my boots thudding against damp wood. The air was colder out there, and the fog was so thick it felt like breathing cloth. The sound grew clearer, not just whispers now, but words I couldn't quite make out. Something about the way they overlapped made it worse. Like a sermon played backward underwater. I walked to the edge of the bridge and leaned over the railing. Below, the creek was swollen from the rain, the current twisting through the rocks like dark glass. And that's when I saw the light, faint, flickering, the color of candle flame. Then another, and another. I blinked, thinking it was the reflection of my taillights. But there they were, a small circle of them, moving beneath the bridge. People. There had to be at least 10 of them, standing knee-deep in the current, robes clinging to their legs. Each held a candle in a glass jar, the flames flickering without smoke. Their heads were bowed, faces hidden beneath the hoods. I could hear them more clearly now, that same low hum, rising and falling like the tide. I couldn't make out any real words, but I knew what prayer sounded like, and this wasn't that. It was too steady, too mechanical, like they were trying to mimic the sound of something human. I should have gotten back in my truck right then, but curiosity kept me leaning over that railing, trying to see what they were circling. The water moved strange there, swirling inward around something submerged. I squinted, and for a second, I thought I saw a shape, a mound of dark cloth maybe, or a log caught in the current. But then one of them lifted their head. The candlelight hit just enough of their face to show a mouth moving fast, faster than human speech should go. I took a step back and my boot hit the loose plank behind me. It creaked, loud. Every single one of them stopped in unison. The humming cut off like a knife. I froze, hands still on the railing. Then, one by one, they turned their heads upward, all at once. 10 faces pale and wet, looking straight up at me from beneath the bridge. The fog caught the candlelight in their eyes, making them shimmer like water. I didn't wait for them to move. I ran back to the cab and slammed the door so hard the window rattled. My hands fumbled for the keys, twisting them uselessly in the ignition. The truck coughed once, then twice, and then, without warning, the headlights flared back on. For a split second, I saw them through the windshield, standing in the creek, unmoving, their faces turned toward me. Then the engine roared to life. I didn't think. I just hit the gas. The tires spun on the slick boards, screeching as I fought for traction. The truck fishtailed before catching, and I tore off the bridge, boards groaning and popping beneath the weight. I didn't look back until I hit the main road. When I did, the fog was thinner, and I could still see those lights. Only now they weren't under the bridge. They were moving, upstream. Slowly, deliberately, following the curve of the creek toward town. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that humming again, low and distant, like it was coming from inside the walls. The next morning I called the county to report it, told them there were people under the bridge performing some kind of ritual. The deputy I talked to didn't seem surprised. He just said, "We'll take a look," and hung up. That was it. No questions. No follow-up. 2 days later, I drove back during daylight, part of me hoping I'd imagined the whole thing. The bridge looked the same, old, gray, half-rotten, but the creek below was empty. I climbed down the embankment to check. No candles, no footprints, not even wax residue, just driftwood and the smell of iron. I remember thinking maybe they'd been part of some backwoods sect. You hear stories out here. Folks still practicing old rituals, things passed down from before the town even had a name. But the part that stuck with me was the way the lights had moved, not scattered, not carried by current, but gliding upstream against it. That night, I took the long way home. I still had to pass the creek, but from farther down. The fog was back, heavier than before. As I slowed near the bend, I caught something in the rearview mirror, faint lights just above the waterline. I told myself it was the reflection of a farmhouse, but deep down I knew it wasn't. They were moving again, slow, patient, following the curve of the creek. I pressed the pedal and didn't look back. About a week later, the papers ran a small story about a fisherman who went missing near the same bridge. They found his truck parked on the shoulder, door wide open, keys still in the ignition. His gear was all there, tackle box, boots, everything. The only thing missing was him. When they searched the banks, they found something wedged between the rocks under the bridge, a small jar with a burnt-out candle inside. The sheriff's office didn't comment. I quit the mill not long after. Moved across the county, away from the creek. But even now, years later, I'll be sitting up late. And sometimes, when the wind dies and the night gets too still, I hear it again. That low, steady hum carried by air that shouldn't move. Once I went down to check the drainage ditch behind my new place, just to prove it was in my head. The water was barely a trickle, but for a moment, I thought I saw something float past. A glass jar, small and round, with a single flame burning inside, drifting slow and sure, upstream. It was the kind of place you only find if you're really looking for it, or trying to disappear. I'd been working myself half to death back then, splitting shifts between a warehouse and a night security job. I needed quiet, real quiet. My uncle told me about an old hunting cabin near the Tennessee line, deep off a back road that twisted through the mountains like something half forgotten. He said it had no electricity, no running water, and definitely no neighbors. That was exactly what I wanted. I drove up there in early October. The leaves were starting to go red and gold, but the air already had that sharp metallic chill that gets in your bones. The road turned from gravel to dirt and then to little more than a pair of tire ruts through brush. I must have gone 6 miles before I saw the clearing. The cabin sat at the edge of a drop, overlooking a dark stretch of forest that seemed to go on forever. It wasn't much. Tin roof, stacked logs, a stone chimney leaning a bit to one side. But it was solid. I unloaded my cooler, lantern, and sleeping bag, and by sunset I'd already settled in. The silence was something else. You don't realize how loud the world is until you find a place without engines or phones or people. Just the wind moving through the trees, the occasional creak of the wood, maybe a night bird now and then. That first night I slept better than I had in months. The second night was different. I woke to a sound, low and steady, like a hum. It was so faint I thought maybe I was dreaming. It reminded me of the buzz from a faraway power line, except there weren't any out there. I checked my watch, 3:12 a.m. exactly. I sat up, listened. The sound faded after a few seconds. When morning came, I laughed it off. Sound plays tricks on you out there. Wind between the pines, maybe a stream echoing through the hills. But that night, at the same time, it came again. Ring 12, louder. It wasn't constant. It pulsed, a rhythmic drone that seemed almost alive. I stepped to the window, but it was black beyond the glass. The moon hadn't risen yet, and the forest was a wall of ink. The hum rolled through the trees, distant but heavy, like it was pressing against the air itself. By the third night, I couldn't ignore it. I set my lantern on the table, left it burning low, and waited. I sat in the dark, listening to the creaks of the cabin, counting the minutes until it began again. When it came, it was stronger, layered, like several tones stacked over each other. Beneath it, I thought I could hear something else. Voices. Low, almost chanting, too faint to understand. It set my nerves on edge. I went outside barefoot, holding a flashlight. The cold hit me hard. The trees swayed just enough to whisper, and I followed the sound downhill. The hum seemed to shift when I moved, like it was aware of me, sliding between the trunks. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Just gone, like it had never been there. The woods went dead still. I stood there for maybe a full minute before heading back inside. That's when I noticed the smell, wet earth and something metallic like old blood. The next morning, I walked the property. I found nothing. No machines, no camps, no signs of people at all. But when I circled behind the cabin near the slope, I saw something carved into a tree, a circle with a line through it, burned deep into the bark. It didn't look new. That evening, I built a small fire out front, more for comfort than warmth. I didn't like being inside anymore. The woods were quiet again, but that kind of quiet feels wrong after a while, like everything's holding its breath. At 3:12, the hum returned. This time I stayed outside, watching the tree line. The flashlight beam shook in my hand as I swept it across the dark. The sound wasn't from one direction anymore. It was all around me. Then, between the trunks, something moved. At first, it looked like shadows shifting, but the longer I stared, the more I could see. Figures. A dozen, maybe, all standing still, all facing me. Their shapes were faint, but I could see hoods, long, dark, draped low over pale faces. My mouth went dry. I couldn't move. The hum grew louder, pulsing with each breath I took. And then underneath it, I heard it. My name. Not shouted, whispered, drawn out like an exhale. Daniel. That broke me. I ran inside, slammed the door, and dragged the old table against it. I didn't sleep. I sat there with the lantern lit, listening as the sound faded slowly into nothing. By dawn, I packed my bag and decided I'd leave as soon as the road thawed from the frost. But when I stepped outside, I froze. The ground around the cabin, all the way to the tree line, was covered in shallow depressions. Not footprints exactly, more like heel marks pressed into the soil, arranged in perfect circles, overlapping each other. And in the center, just in front of the porch, was that same symbol from the tree, drawn in ash. I got in my truck and drove. The road was worse than I remembered, and halfway down, I caught something in the mirror, a flicker of motion on the ridge above the cabin. A figure standing there, hooded, perfectly still. When I reached the main road, my radio crackled to life even though there shouldn't have been a signal. Just static at first, then faint under it, the hum. I turned it off, drove until sunrise, and didn't stop until I was back in town. I told a ranger about what I'd seen. He looked at me for a long time before saying, "You stayed in the old Harlan place, didn't you?" I nodded. He rubbed his chin, muttered something about local folks not going near that ridge anymore. Said there used to be an old settlement there, a church that burned down in the 60s. No one ever rebuilt, but people still reported hearing singing in those woods. I didn't go back. I sold the cabin through a realtor and made sure the paperwork went through without me ever setting foot there again. But the thing is, it didn't stop. Sometimes, even now, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and feel that same vibration in the air. Low, deep, almost beneath hearing. And when I check the clock, it's always the same. But the worst part isn't the sound anymore. It's what comes after. Every time it fades, there's this single moment, a pause, where it's like the world forgets to breathe. And in that silence, just before everything returns to normal, I can hear them, breathing back. My cousin Luke and I used to think we were the toughest kids in Avery County. We were both 20 that summer between jobs and figured a little backwoods camping would do us some good. He had a line on a spot past an old mining trail about 5 miles south of Linville. Said it used to be part of the Cranberry Iron Works back in the late 1800s before a cave-in shut the whole thing down. There were still rusted cart tracks, old shacks, and if you hiked far enough, a ridge that opened onto the valley below. It sounded perfect, remote, quiet, and forgotten. We parked his truck by a creek crossing, shouldered our packs, and started up the trail. The woods there were thick, dark pine mixed with tulip trees and underbrush that clawed at your legs. Every once in a while, we'd see a relic from the mine, a broken lantern, a rail spike, or a collapsed timber beam half swallowed by roots. The air had that cool, heavy dampness that never quite lifts in the mountains. We set up camp near the ridge, just below where the tree line thins out. From up there, you could see the valley like a dark green ocean. The first night was uneventful, just crickets and the occasional whippoorwill. We cooked beans over a fire, drank a few beers, and traded ghost stories until the moon rose high enough to paint everything silver. It was one of those rare nights where the forest almost felt welcoming. The next evening, though, that changed. It started near dusk. The woods went quiet in a way that felt wrong. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. I remember telling Luke it felt like we were being listened to. He laughed it off, said it was just my nerves. We'd both grown up around enough old-timers telling stories about witchy women in the woods and the church that sang at night to know how to scare ourselves. But then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, uneven, coming down the ridge from the east. At first we figured it was another camper, maybe some hunter out late. But when we looked up, we saw her, a woman. She was barefoot, wearing a white dress that hung to her ankles and fluttered just enough to catch the dying light. Her hair was long, tangled, the color of damp straw. She was walking backward down the ridge, each step careful, deliberate, but jerky, like she wasn't quite in control of her body. Her hands were clasped tight in front of her chest, as if she were praying. Her head tilted slightly upward, eyes closed. I remember whispering, "Luke, what the hell?" But he didn't answer. Behind her came 4 others, hooded, each carrying a candle inside a glass jar. The light from those jars glowed like small suns against the dark woods. They moved in a line, following her silently. The woman's backward steps matched their forward ones exactly, like they'd practiced it. We ducked behind a fallen log. My heart was hammering so loud I thought for sure they'd hear. The air had gone thick, heavy, like the whole forest was holding still. As they passed, the humming started. It wasn't a song, not really. More like a single tone, low, droning, unbroken. It came from the hooded ones, a vibration in their throats that made my skin crawl. The woman kept her head tilted to the sky, still walking backward, lips moving in some silent prayer. When they reached the flat below our camp, she stopped. The hum grew louder, circling around her. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Total silence. After a few seconds, they turned, all 5 of them, facing uphill, toward us. I swear her eyes were still shut, but it felt like she was looking right at where we hid. The candlelight flickered once, then went out. Just gone. We waited there for nearly an hour before daring to move. Luke wanted to check it out. I told him no way, that we'd wait until daylight. But he said he just wanted to make sure they weren't some kind of cult or trespassers setting up nearby. Against my better judgment, I followed him down. When we reached the flat, there were no footprints. The ground was damp from the mist, soft enough to hold a print easily, but there was nothing. Not from them, not even from her bare feet. That night, I barely slept. Every time the wind shifted, I swore I heard the hum again, far off through the trees. Sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up to Luke whispering my name. His flashlight was off, but I could see the outline of his face, pale against the dark. He pointed toward the edge of our camp. There, arranged neatly in a circle, were small figures, little clay idols, no taller than my thumb. Each one had its head turned completely backward. I don't remember standing up, but suddenly I was outside the tent, kicking them away with my boot. The clay was damp, freshly molded. Luke was shaking. He said he hadn't heard anything, hadn't seen anyone approach. We packed up at first light. Neither of us spoke much. When we reached the truck, Luke stopped and turned back toward the ridge. His face drained of color. "Do you see that?" he whispered. I followed his gaze. Way up on the ridge, near where we'd first seen her, stood the woman. Same white dress, same clasped hands. Only now she was facing us. Her head tilted slightly, eyes still shut. The morning light made her look pale as ash. We got in the truck and didn't stop driving until we hit the highway. For a while, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some weird ritual, maybe locals messing with us. But deep down, I knew there was something older in those woods, something not meant to be disturbed. I thought that was the end of it. But a few weeks later, I started hearing the hum again. Not out in the woods, in my house, late at night. Soft at first, like the sound of a refrigerator motor, but it grew louder the longer I listened. One night I got up thinking it was something outside, maybe a car idling on the road. I opened the door, and there it was again. The hum, pulsing like breath. I stood on the porch, waiting for it to fade, but it didn't. It came closer, like someone was walking around the yard, circling. My stomach dropped when I noticed the pattern. 3 slow beats, then silence. 3 again. Like a prayer rhythm. The next morning, I found something on my porch. Another clay idol. its head turned backward. I called Luke right after that. He sounded different, quiet, tired. He said he'd been hearing the same thing. Then, after a long pause, he asked me something that made my blood run cold. "Do you remember her hands?" I said, "Yeah, clasped together in front of her chest." He said, "They weren't clasped." I looked closer before she passed us. Her fingers were locked, but wrong. The backs of her hands were pressed together, like they'd been turned around. That night I couldn't sleep. Every noise in the house felt deliberate. The creak of the floor, the whisper of wind through the cracks. Around 3 in the morning, I woke again to the hum, this time right outside my window. I didn't look. I couldn't, but I saw the light. Faint, flickering, candlelight. It moved slowly past the window, then stopped. I held my breath. The hum stopped too. And in the stillness I heard something else, footsteps. But they weren't coming closer. They were retreating, only they didn't sound right. Each step was backward, the dirt scraping before the heel touched down. I don't remember falling asleep. When the sun came up, there was nothing outside. No prints, no candles, nothing. Just the faint smell of clay. I tried to tell myself it was over, that maybe I'd imagined half of it. But about a month later, Luke disappeared. His truck was found parked at the trailhead by the same ridge. Inside were his camping gear and a half-empty thermos of coffee. They never found him. The search teams said the woods were too thick to navigate properly, that the old mine shafts made it dangerous. They called it a tragic accident. Maybe he fell. But the rescuers told me something else quietly, off the record. They said that up near the ridge, they'd found small clay figures in a circle. Every one of them with its head turned backward. That was 10 years ago. I moved 3 states away, got married, started a family. But sometimes late at night, when the world is still, I'll hear it again, faint, rhythmic, pulsing through the walls. And when I do, I'll check the clock. It's always the same time. 3 slow beats. Silence. Then, just before it fades, a whisper so soft I can barely tell if it's real. A woman's voice, walking backward through the dark. It was late October the night I found the church. I remember because the air had that kind of chill that seeps through your jacket and clings to your bones. Not quite winter yet, but close enough that you could smell it coming. I'd been driving through Avery County after visiting an old friend in Elk Park, trying to take a shortcut back toward Linville. I'd driven those roads my whole life, or so I thought. But somehow that night, everything looked unfamiliar. The turns felt sharper, the woods deeper. My phone had lost signal miles back, and the radio was nothing but static. The only light came from my headlights cutting through the trees, bouncing off the gravel. I didn't realize how long I'd been driving until I noticed the gas gauge creeping toward empty. That's when I saw it, a narrow dirt road veering off to the right, half covered by branches, like the forest was trying to reclaim it. There wasn't a sign, but something about it made me slow down. Maybe I thought it would lead to a farmhouse or a store. Maybe I just didn't want to admit I was lost. I turned onto it, tires crunching on old gravel. The road wound uphill through thick pines. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No crickets, no wind. Just the hum of my engine. About 10 minutes in, the road opened into a small clearing. And that's when I saw it. A church. It sat at the edge of the clearing like it had grown out of the ground, built from dark stone, the kind you only see in old cemeteries. Ivy crawled up its sides, and the roof sagged under the weight of years. The windows glowed faintly, candles flickering behind stained glass panes. There was no sign, no name, no lights in the lot. Just the building itself, standing quiet under the trees. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, listening. I could hear faint humming, low and rhythmic, almost like chanting. It came from inside. I figured maybe it was some kind of late-night service or a prayer group. Folks in these parts can be private about their worship, and I didn't want to intrude. But the place didn't look abandoned. When I stepped out, the air hit me. Cold, damp, carrying the smell of rain and something else. Copper, metallic, like blood. My boots sank a little into the wet ground as I walked up the short path to the front steps. The closer I got, the clearer the sound became. Dozens of voices humming in unison, one constant note that seemed to vibrate through the stone. I hesitated, then knocked. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the only light came from candles placed along the aisle and behind the stained glass. The glow was warm but dim, just enough to see rows of people kneeling in the pews. There must have been 30 of them, all dressed in black. Their faces were covered with burlap sacks, each marked with a hand-drawn cross in what looked like ash. The humming didn't stop when I entered. It grew louder, layered, almost like it was echoing inside my chest. The air felt heavy, thick enough to taste. I took a step back, ready to apologize and leave, but none of them moved. Not a single head turned. They just kept humming, swaying gently in rhythm. Something about it felt wrong. Not just strange, wrong. Like being underwater too long, your body begging you to surface. I turned to go, but before I reached the door I heard a sound, a chair sliding across the floor. Then another. The humming stopped. I looked back. All of them were facing me now. I couldn't see their eyes through the burlap, but I could feel them, every one of them. The air shifted, colder now, and that copper smell grew stronger. A tall man stood from the front pew. He was holding something, a wooden cross carved from rough timber, the edges splintered. He didn't walk toward me. He just lifted it, slow and deliberate, pointing it in my direction. My throat went dry. "Sorry," I muttered. "Didn't mean to." Before I could finish, the candles flickered out. All of them. The room plunged into darkness. The humming started again. Only this time it wasn't in unison. It came in waves, scattered and uneven, like whispers just behind my ears. I stumbled for the door, heart pounding, but when I pushed it open, there was nothing outside. Not the clearing, not my truck, just trees, black silhouettes packed close together, stretching into the dark. I must have run for an hour, though it felt like forever. Every direction looked the same. The ground was soft, muddy, no trail or road. The humming followed me, sometimes close, sometimes far off, but never gone. Once I looked back and saw a faint light flickering between the trees. Candlelight, moving. I tripped, hit the dirt, and didn't dare get up until the sound faded again. When I finally stopped, I found myself standing in front of the church again. It was impossible. I'd been running downhill. But there it was, same ivy, same stone walls, candles glowing through the glass. Only this time the door was open wider and I could see inside. The pews were empty. The burlap sacks lay in a pile by the altar, as if shed like old skin. The humming came from beneath the floor now, a dull vibration pulsing through the boards. I should have run again, but I couldn't move. I just stood there watching as one of the candles near the altar flickered, then went out. A few seconds later, another followed, then another. One by one, the light faded until the last candle near the doorway dimmed. And in the reflection of the stained glass, I saw movement, shapes, dozens of them. They were standing behind me. I don't remember leaving. The next thing I knew, I was back in my truck, parked on the shoulder of the highway. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. I drove until I hit a gas station in Newland, where I sat under the fluorescent lights until sunrise, trying to make sense of it. When I finally went back the next afternoon, because of course I did, I had to see, there was no dirt road. I retraced every mile, even stopped at a farmhouse to ask an old man who lived nearby. He said there hadn't been a church in those woods for at least 50 years. The old one, he told me, burned down sometime in the 1940s after a lightning strike. Preacher said God didn't want that kind of worship no more, he added, half smiling like it was a joke he didn't want to explain. I pressed him on it. What kind of worship? But he just shook his head and said, "If you heard 'em singing, son, you were lucky they let you leave. It's been over 15 years since that night. But I still think about it every time I drive through the mountains. Especially when it rains. That smell of copper and damp stone. And sometimes late at night, I'll catch a faint humming under the static of the radio. Just a single note, low and steady, that fades the moment I notice it. I've changed routes since then. Avoid the back roads, keep to the main highways. But there's one thing that still bothers me. A few weeks after that night, I found a film envelope wedged under my windshield wiper. No note, no name. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the same stone church, dark, overgrown, lit by candles through stained glass. Only this time, in the window nearest the door, a figure stood looking out. It wasn't wearing a burlap sack. It was wearing my face. I work maintenance for the County Park Service up near Carter County, Tennessee. It's mostly routine stuff, clearing brush after storms, repainting trail signs, making sure campers don't dump their trash in the creeks. I've always liked the quiet work, the smell of pine and damp earth. But there's one trail I won't step foot on anymore. Willow Trail. I don't even like saying the name out loud now. It started last spring after a heavy storm swept through the mountains. A mess of branches had fallen across the back trails, so my supervisor sent me out alone to clear them. The others were busy repairing a washed-out footbridge near the ranger station. Willow Trail had been closed for years, erosion and some land dispute, I think. But he told me to at least check the path for damage. Said maybe we could reopen it for hikers come summer. The trail had sat past a rusted gate, half swallowed by weeds. There used to be an old wooden sign there, but it had rotted down to splinters. The dirt road beyond it sloped into the woods, the canopy so thick it was dim even at noon. I remember the silence most of all. No birds, no crickets, just the distant creak of trees shifting in the wind. About a mile in, I started noticing them. Bones, small at first, tied together with brown twine, dangling from the branches. They clicked gently when the wind passed through, soft like someone tapping their fingernails on glass. I figured it was some hiker's creepy art project, or maybe teenagers messing around. There's no shortage of weird folks out here who think the mountains are their personal canvas. But then I saw the carvings. One of the bones, a femur I think, had letters scratched into it. Not random etchings, but neat, careful initials. EM. I stopped dead. The next one had another set. JC. I remember running my fingers over the grooves. It felt deliberate, almost reverent. There was no animal that could have done that. I took a few photos on my phone, thinking I'd report it later, maybe even collect one to show my supervisor. But as I moved farther down the path, I saw more and more of them, hanging from nearly every tree, some large, some small, all strung with the same weathered twine. They swayed together, clicking softly in rhythm, like some kind of skeletal wind chime orchestra. That's when the smell hit me. It wasn't rot exactly, more like wet copper and something earthy, like clay. I told myself it was probably just animal remains left out too long. But the air grew thicker the deeper I went, heavy with something that made the back of my throat ache. At some point, I realized I'd been walking longer than I should have. Willow Trail is only about 2.5 miles to the old overlook, but it felt like I'd been trudging for hours. I checked my phone, no signal of course, and the time hadn't changed much, but the light had shifted. Everything looked duller, tinted gray, like twilight had come early. That's when I heard it, whispering, faint at first, so faint I thought it was the wind sliding through the trees. But it grew steadier, layered like many voices murmuring at once. I stopped listening. It came from somewhere up ahead, past a curve in the trail. I thought maybe I'd stumbled on campers or some kind of local ritual thing. I'd seen stranger. But the words didn't sound like English. Just a low, continuous murmur, rhythmically rising and falling. It had a texture to it, if that makes sense, like breath against wood. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe just stubbornness. I pressed on, stepping quietly, trying not to crunch the leaves under my boots. After a few minutes, the trees thinned and I saw a clearing. The ground was bare dirt, ringed with the same bone charms, hundreds of them hanging from poles stuck in the ground. They framed the clearing like a fence. In the center sat about a dozen people in a perfect circle. They weren't moving. Each of them held a small object to their mouth, one of those bone markers. They were whispering into them, the sound blending into that same humming chant I'd been hearing. Their faces were pale, almost gray under the shadows, and their clothes looked rough, handmade maybe. I stayed hidden behind a fallen log, my heart hammering so hard I thought they'd hear it. I don't know how long I crouched there, just staring. I remember thinking, this isn't real. This can't be happening. Then one of them lifted their head. It was an old man, at least I think it was. His skin hung loose, his hair thin and white, but his eyes were wrong, too clear, too bright. He turned his head slightly, sniffed the air, and the humming stopped. Every single one of them turned toward the woods where I was hiding. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then they all lowered their bone charms in unison, like they'd finished some prayer. I couldn't breathe. I just backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on them. When I turned to leave, I realized the path was gone. I mean it, gone. The trees had closed in behind me, roots and brambles covering what used to be open ground. It was like the forest had shifted while I wasn't looking. I spun in circles, trying to find any direction that looked familiar. That's when the whispering started again, but closer this time, all around me. I could hear it between the trees, inside the branches, like the bones themselves were murmuring. I bolted. I didn't care which way I was going. I just ran. I swear the woods twisted as I moved. No matter which direction I turned, I ended up seeing those same hanging bones. At one point, I nearly tripped over a pile of them arranged in a spiral, each one carved with letters. By the time I found sunlight breaking through the trees, I was half delirious. I burst out onto a gravel road that wasn't the one I'd come in on. My truck was nowhere in sight, and my GPS still showed blank. It took me almost an hour of walking before I found a ranger truck parked near a fire access gate. I flagged them down, gasping, trying to explain what I'd seen. The two rangers exchanged looks like they'd heard it before. One of them just said, "You've been down Willow Trail, haven't you?" They drove me back to my truck and told me not to worry about filing a report. They'd take care of it. I didn't push it. I just wanted to leave. But that night, when I showered back at my cabin, I noticed something on my wrist. A faint red mark, like a burn, in the shape of a circle. Inside it, tiny scratches, letters. My initials. I quit the Park Service a week later. I told them I was moving back to Nashville, that I needed a change of pace. But the truth is, I can't sleep right anymore. Every night I hear it, the clicking of bones in the wind, faint but steady, like it's just outside my window. And sometimes, when it's quiet, I swear I hear whispering. Not words I can make out, just the sound of breath moving through hollow things. The kind of sound you can feel in your ribs. I've thought about going back to see if the trail's still there, to prove to myself that it wasn't real. But deep down, I know it is. Because a few days ago, I found something hanging from the tree behind my house. A small charm. Bones tied with twine, my initials carved into the side. It started as a dare. My buddy Travis had been talking all week about the old fire tower past Cade's Hollow, a forgotten metal skeleton perched on the ridge. Locals said it hadn't been used since the 60s, back when lightning fires still rolled through the valley. I'd seen it from the highway a few times, a black outline against the orange horizon. He said at night, you could sometimes see light up there, like someone was still keeping watch. We'd been drinking around the campfire when he leaned over and said, "Bet you won't climb it." I don't know why I said yes. Maybe it was pride, maybe the whiskey, maybe because I'd spent my whole life out here and thought I'd seen everything these hills could throw at me. I left just after midnight, when the fog started creeping low across the hollow. The trail to the tower was little more than a deer path, swallowed by vines and thorns. My flashlight cut through the mist in thin beams, catching glimpses of trees slick with dew. Everything felt too still. The tower appeared suddenly through the haze, a tall, rusted frame with a cabin on top, its metal steps groaning as the wind pushed against them. I hesitated at the base, listening. The forest was quiet except for the occasional drip of water from the leaves. When I started climbing, the cold metal burned against my palms. Every step echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Halfway up, the woods below looked like a sea of gray, no movement, no sound. When I reached the top, I expected to see darkness in every direction. Instead, I saw fire. Down in the clearing, maybe 200 yards from the base of the tower, was a perfect circle of flame. It wasn't wild or spreading. It burned clean even, like someone had drawn a ring in the grass and set it alight. Around it stood figures, at least a dozen, moving in rhythm, their shadows stretching long across the ground. They weren't chaotic like you'd imagine. They moved slow, deliberate, almost graceful, tossing handfuls of white powder into the flames. The fire didn't roar. It pulsed, breathing in sync with them. The strangest part was the silence. No crackle of wood, no chant, just the faint hiss of the powder hitting the fire. I lifted my phone, zoomed in, and snapped a photo. As I did, one of the figures stopped mid-step, their head turning up toward the tower. I froze. I couldn't see their face clearly, just the pale outline of it glinting in the light. Then another turned, and another, until every single one of them was staring up. I ducked low, heart pounding. After a few seconds, I peeked over the edge again, but the clearing was empty. The fire still burned, but the people were gone. The circle flickered once, then went out completely, leaving only darkness. I climbed down fast, my hands slick with sweat. When I reached the ground, the air smelled like burned sage and something metallic. The clearing should have been close. I'd seen it from above, but when I tried to find it, the path twisted on itself. The more I searched, the colder it got, until I finally gave up and stumbled back to the truck. Back home, I pulled up the photo on my phone. At first, it just looked like what I remembered, a circle of fire. But when I zoomed in, I saw faces in the smoke. Not just a few, hundreds. Pale, indistinct faces, each one twisted as if screaming without sound. Some were clear enough to see eyes. One of them looked like Travis. I didn't sleep that night. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the smell of ash. Not the faint scent of a burned-out campfire, but fresh, heavy smoke, like something was burning just outside my window. When I sat up, I heard it, soft chanting, rhythmic, almost like breathing. My room was dark except for an orange glow seeping through the curtains. I pulled them back and froze. Out in my field, the same one that sloped down behind my house, was another burning circle. The fire was small, controlled, just like before, and the same figures were there, moving in that same slow, perfect rhythm. I could see them clearly this time, close enough to make out their pale hands tossing powder into the flames. Their faces were masked in ash, but their eyes caught the firelight, wide and bright, reflecting orange. I grabbed my phone again, shaking, trying to record. But when I looked through the screen, there was nothing there. Just darkness. No fire, no figures, no sound. When I lowered it, the circle was gone. The smell lingered, though. I could taste it on my tongue, acrid, bitter, like burned metal. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I found a ring of scorched grass exactly where the fire had been. The soil was blackened in a perfect circle, but the rest of the field was untouched. My neighbor, an old farmer named Doyle, came by when he saw me standing out there. He said his daddy used to talk about things like that. Fires in circles, always near the hollows. Said it was the Watchers, he told me. Old spirits or folks pretending to be. Either way, best not to look at them. I laughed it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night I drove back toward Cade's Hollow, hoping to prove to myself it had all been some trick of light, maybe an illegal burn or something. But when I reached the ridge, the tower was gone. The foundation was still there, just a square of concrete choked with weeds, but no metal, no stairs, no cabin. I stood there until dark, waiting for the fire to appear again. It didn't. When I finally drove home, the road felt longer than before, winding through unfamiliar stretches of trees. My headlights flickered as I passed a clearing, and for a split second I thought I saw people standing among the trees, motionless. That night, the chanting came again, faint, outside my house. I didn't look this time. I just lay there, listening to it rise and fall like breathing. Around 3 in the morning, the smell of ash seeped back in. I could feel the heat through the window, even though I knew there was nothing there. I left the next day, packed everything I owned, and drove north. I told myself I'd never come back to Tennessee, never set foot in those hills again. But last week I got a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photo, the one I took from the tower. Except this time the faces were clearer, and one of them was mine.